You're watching BCTV, Branford's community access station.
This is BCTV, Branford Government Television, a service of Branford Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the Town of Branford.
All right, we're going to get started. Town of Branford Board of Finance meeting for January 29th, 2018. First on the agenda is to approve the minutes of the November 27th, 17, and December 18th, 2017 meetings.
I'll move both of them.
Both of the minutes? Seconded by Bob. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Next is citizens' comments. If there's anybody from the audience that'd like to make comments with regards to tonight's agenda, they're welcome. With no takers, I'll move on to item number 3, which is to consider and if appropriate approve a request from the Board of Fire Commissioners for the following budget transfer from regular wages and salaries, $50,000, to overtime, $50,000, and from contingency, $59,156, into accumulated sick pay, $59,156. Chief, welcome.
Hello, thank you. Yep, the Board of Fire Commissioners approved the 2 mid-year transfers. The transfer from salaries is surplus in that account due to vacancies. We've been filling and paying the replacements out of overtime. We had 3 vacancies up until tonight. The board has voted to fill those vacancies with 3 candidates, so hopefully we can get those people in and working, although that will be a little bit of a process as they go to the fire academy, et cetera. So that's surplus in the salary account going to overtime, and the second contingency to accumulated sick are the retirements of Lowell Collingwood and Rob Paradise, and that was the calculated sick time that they're allotted due to their contract.
Okay, questions from the chief? Charlie?
Chief, just wondered why the vacancies, why 3 vacancies? Did they retire or did they leave?
So we had two retirements earlier in the year, and we recently had another vacancy that just occurred.
Okay.
So we had filled one of them in August. That firefighter went to the fire academy, is currently online. We then had a firefighter leave and go to Westport. That individual was from the area, and it's just the way things are these days.
Okay.
People move around a lot more than they are. And the other one was created when we promoted, and tonight was the first opportunity we've had to be able to try to fill those vacancies.
Thanks.
Victor, and then Bob.
Joe, is there a reason why we're not using other post-employment benefits account, or is that?
As far, I think that's a fund, that's really probably not the, this is for accumulated sick pay.
Yes, yeah, that's true. The other post-employment benefits is really for the health insurance of retirees. So basically, typically what happens is the departments aren't budgeting for accumulated sick unless they know someone, let's say, for example, somebody has a contract and they said that they're going to be retiring at a certain point in time. That'd be the only time we would actually budget accumulated sick in the departments. And in some departments, we can offset it by a lapse in the salary account. But in the fire department, it's a little bit tougher because of the minimum staffing. You're replacing folks immediately. So for example, if I left the town of Branford and I had a sick payout, with the time it would take you to replace me, presumably it would offset some of that.
But OPEB is just for medical insurance, is that correct?
Correct. In Branford's case, the OPEB stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits, and other distinguishes it from pensions. In some communities, there are post-employment benefits other than health benefits, but in Branford's case, it's just health benefits.
Okay, thank you.
Jim, what's the contingency balance?
The contingency balance, assuming tonight's transfers, or taking into account tonight's transfers, would be $729,909.
Thanks. Bob, you had a question?
Yeah, Chief, so in the 17-18 budget, we budgeted $222,000 for overtime, so we've depleted that at this point?
That's correct.
Okay, so we've got to get to the end of the fiscal year. Do you see more transfers?
I do see more transfers from the salary, hopefully I can cover the majority of them from the salary account. Typically, we've tried to reduce expenditures in other accounts in the past. I'm reluctant to shut down, for instance, Rescue 2, which is the extra shift we run Monday through Friday for 10 hours, because that shift really allows us a lot of flexibility in the available manpower, and with the ambulances being as busy as they are, they're frequently staffing to backfill, and then we bill off of that, so the ambulance revenue kind of offsets that.
Right, so it's a revenue generating, yep, certainly understand that. And then the accumulated sick time, and Jim is right, we budgeted 0 for 17-18. I think we budgeted $29,000 in 16-17, so we had a goose egg for this fiscal year, so, okay, thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Other questions?
I'll move it, Joe.
Been
Second.
moved by Jeff, seconded by Victor. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Next is to discuss the impact of the governor's decision to postpone $4.3 billion in state transportation projects and its impact on the Harbor Street culvert project. Welcome.
Hello.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, thanks.
Well, fortunately, we're not being cut $4.3 billion. We actually never needed it. But, yeah, so as you know, we have the Harbor Street Culvert Project. We actually just received bids on January 12th for the project, and they were favorable bids with a low bid within our budget and with an experienced contractor. And unfortunately, the day before we received bids, we received the notice, the press release from the governor freezing the funds, of which the state funding included the state contribution for this project for us. I did reach out to the DOT to find out kind of what that means for us if we were to move forward with the project. So we have a commitment to fund. It's still valid, but we hadn't gotten our supplemental application approved yet through the DOT. I think they may have known something was coming up because we submitted it like early to mid-December. And obviously, since it was frozen, I don't believe it's gone to bonding or anything for it to be actually given us a final award from the state. But we shouldn't be in jeopardy if the funding stays intact and a solution is found through the legislature to fund the Special Transportation Fund. We expect that our expenses would still be reimbursable. As you recall, we approved $2.15 million last March for the project, of which we have a 46.44% contribution from the state. Currently, it's a $952,000 thereabouts listing on their fund, of which with our supplemental, which included some additional costs, it would bump up the total grant amount to about $992,000. I did send to you today, I'm not sure if you saw or had a chance to read it, we fortuitously received the inspection report from May of 2016. We've been monitoring the bridge because it's in very poor condition. And that report was actually emailed to us on Friday afternoon, which reinforced the fact that it is in very poor condition. I do want you to know that we subsequently to that inspection report that the town had made 2 temporary repairs to the bridge, knowing that there were some significant deficiencies with some of the issues on the bridge in order to buy us the time to reconstruct it. So we're here tonight just to inform you of the fact that the state funding is frozen at this time, and kind of hope for your concurrence to move forward with the project, to award the contract to the current low bidder, and to proceed with shop drawing submittals and approvals, and hopefully have the bridge under construction by probably late spring
So Janice, a couple questions. How long is the bid good for?
We put 60 days in the bid documents.
And when does that expire?
So January 12th, the bids were received, so 60 days from then, which would be about March, middle of March.
Okay. And I didn't see the report that you sent today, but could you highlight, maybe help us through this a little bit as to the deficiencies and whether or not it's, you consider it what type of risk it is for the town to not proceed as soon as possible on this?
So in the email where this report was sent to me, the DOT Bridge Inspecting Unit would have requested us to do a load rating currently on the bridge, given its condition. I did inform him of the temporary, repairs we did to the bridge and the fact that we're hoping to proceed with replacement ASAP. So I think he was satisfied with that for now. But right now we have extensive spalling of the concrete deck on one side of the bridge, whereas most of the rebar that is exposed is also completely deteriorated. Fortunately for us, it's about a 10-foot span, so it's not a huge span. We also had some major stones from the abutment that were missing and large gaps, and at one point we had a void that went from the sidewalk area down to the void below, and we had to fill that with concrete as one of our temporary measures, as well as another part on the other side of the abutment. We had to shore up with some concrete, Saccrete bags, and pour some concrete in there to try and kind of hold up that side of the bridge. But we also had an area where we had settlement on the road because it is a culvert, so there's a slab, and then there's about 3 feet of fill over the slab and then the roadway surface, and we were seeing a depression forming, and where the two slabs meet, there was a separation, and a void had created where all the soil between the slab and the road was eroding through. So we opened that up and we sealed it off and backfilled it so that we wouldn't have that continued erosion and settlement there.
So this inspection was done in 2016?
Yes.
You're just getting it now?
Yes, but they did call me. The engineers, we're responsible, the town is responsible for bridges under 20 feet, but the DOT does try and get out and inspect for us. We also had, it must have been about 4 or 5 years ago, an engineering firm offered to come in and take a look at the bridges for us for free. So the gentleman went around and took a look at them because they're not on the standard rotation for bridge inspection by the state. And it was really to drum up business on their part to try and get us on a funding list and possibly be our design engineers. And when he went out and looked at this particular bridge, he called me up immediately. He didn't realize it was a culvert, and when he saw the depression in the road, he was really concerned. And that got us starting, actually, really taking a look at the bridge about 4 or 5 years ago. That's when we decided to put in the application for the funding. But it did quickly deteriorate the underside of that slab.
And there was some work done on it years ago. Was that on the bridge itself or the culvert?
No, I think it was probably some roadway work. I did look in our archives, but I couldn't find any reference to any projects out there.
It was back in the 80s, so.
Yeah, there was some work done, I think, with some sidewalk improvements, and then the rail along the sidewalk, I think, was done in the 90s. And then there may have been some road widening work. But I actually have the original plans for this bridge, and it dates back to the 1930s.
Yeah.
It's nice looking.
Yeah.
And it's 2 sheets of paper.
Yeah. Back in the Don Ellis days.
Yeah.
Are they going to treat this on a triage basis? Are they going to look at the worst, because this is rated 4?
Right.
Are they going to look at them on the projects based on how critical they are? Or?
No, I don't think there's any consideration about the needs for the projects in the freeze that was put forth. Is that what you're referencing?
Yeah.
So we already have, we have an approval to fund from the state. We had submitted our application a couple years ago. But it was just the governor just froze the funds because there was a deficiency in the special transportation fund. And watching the news tonight, they're talking about, back again, talking about tolls and other, gas tax increases. But I think the governor is supposed to come out with something by the end of this week with what his proposed plan is to make this special transportation fund solvent again. So in light of those concerns, he just froze the whole thing, so.
Charlie?
Janice, do we have many other bridges that are less than a 10-foot span?
Well, we have, I think, close to 10 that are under 20 feet.
Oh, is that the limit?
Yeah,
Is
so
it over?
there's a under 20, and then there's over 20. And then there's the orphan bridges.
Is it the ones that are under 20 that the town is responsible for?
Yeah, well, we're responsible for all of them, but in terms of the inspections, yes, they're not as diligently inspected by the DOT as the over 20s are.
And does the state usually fund any length bridge?
There are different funding sources for the different bridges. Like, for instance, the School Ground Road Bridge was just over 20, and that was a federal local bridge program that we were funded through, and that was an 80-20. But that was federally funded and required, following kind of all of the federal procurement requirements and some of the added inspection requirements and things that DOT requires for that funding source. Under this funding source, it's looked upon as a town project, and we administer the project as we see fit, and we don't have to meet all of those special procurement requirements. It's just the town's procurement requirements and inspection. But we have professional engineers, WMC, who did the design, and they'll do the inspection process for us. But it's not quite as arduous as the...
So what was the low bid?
You have that here. So we did have a low bid who then withdrew his bid because when we asked for examples of his work, which were required as part of the bid process, he decided that there was an error and he withdrew his bid. So the lowest bid, which was withdrawn, was $1,372,498.
A 1.3?
Yeah, 1.37.
Okay.
And then once he withdrew his bid, the next low bid was 1.455. And that's still within our estimated construction costs, including some contingencies that we were submitting for the supplemental
And
application.
how long will that offer last from the 1.455?
It's a 60-day bid requirement.
And then what happens?
If we don't proceed to contract, then we'll have to likely rebid the project.
So do you think, your recommendation is to proceed?
Yes.
From a public safety standpoint?
Yes.
And an engineering standpoint? Is there a weight limit on the bridge at this point?
No, there's no, that was one of the things that was brought up by the bridge inspection unit, was to possibly do a weight evaluation on it. But in light of the fact that we've done some temporary repairs, as well as that we're going to be replacing it, he didn't push that issue right now.
So if in fact we don't really know what's going to happen in Hartford, but we suspect that they are going to fund this project.
Right.
But right now, we don't have the guarantee like we thought we would have had. Jamie, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think we identified this as a priority project. It needs to be done as, all the reasons Janice had mentioned. I think it's also important to know, Janice did contact DOT, and if we were to proceed and the funds were then unfrozen or released, we would be reimbursed for our proportionate share due to us. So that it's, if we proceed ahead of that commitment letter, we still are not letting go of those funds. So those will still be made available. I believe, this is an issue that the governor had stated back when the legislature was adopting the budget, that he felt that there needed to be some revenues to support the special transportation fund, new revenues, in order to not only to sustain it, but he was also looking at increased revenues for his projects moving forward. So I think, to your question about are they prioritized? I think at this point in time, no, they weren't. The whole program was just frozen. However, I have been in touch with our state delegation, let them know that the condition of this bridge and that it is a public safety issue. So if they do release funds incrementally, that this would definitely be a priority for the town of Branford. Commissioner Rediker is going to be speaking at a meeting on Wednesday, which I plan to attend, and I believe Janice will be attending as well. So hopefully we get an update on the funding at that point in time. And as we all know, the legislature is going back into session on February 7th, and hopefully they'll come to some resolution on funding transportation.
Thanks, Jimmy. Okay, so we don't need to reauthorize anything. What this is, it's a full disclosure as to really what the situation is. We've already approved this project, knowing that there was a possible commitment of state funding. So there's nothing we need to do tonight, but I think it would be helpful to, and the reason why it's coming here is because if in fact the state does not come through with the grant, then we will be responsible for that $992,000. But I think in light of what you've told us, I would entertain a motion to recommend that we proceed.
I'll recommend it.
I'll second it.
Additional questions or comments?
Just one question. Janice, so we have all the easements worked out at this point?
Yes.
Okay, I know that was an
Yeah,
an
it
issue.
took all summer last summer to get the
Okay,
easements.
great.
All right, Janice, good luck.
All right, thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Very good. Okay, thanks for that. Next is number 5, to discuss a letter from the State Treasurer regarding Community Reinvestment Act, CRA, rating of 2 federally chartered banks. Jim has provided us with some information on this, and Jim, you want to take this one?
Sure. Basically, the event that is driving this disclosure is about a week or so ago, January 17th, both myself and the first selectman received a letter from the State Treasurer's Office saying that the 2 federally chartered banks in our area, Santander and Wells Fargo, received needs to improve ratings from the Community Reinvestment Act, and that according to statutes, banks with those ratings should not receive public deposits. Just sort of by way of background, the Community Reinvestment Act was a law that was created in response to what was typically referred to as redlining. And redlining was a process whereby banks would not lend in certain areas. And the term redlining means that somebody simply took a map and drew a red line around areas that they wouldn't make loans to. And usually those were in poor, low-income areas. So the Community Reinvestment Act basically encouraged banks to be good citizens and to lend in those areas. And there's a couple of different categories that the CRA assigns to banks. The first one is outstanding. Second is satisfactory, and there's a high satisfactory and a low satisfactory, so there's 2 different areas of satisfactory. Then there's needs to improve or substantial non-compliance. So in the case of these 2 institutions that the State Treasurer's Office has informed us of, they received a needs to improve. Now, I think one of the things to kind of put this in a little bit of context is that these ratings came out almost a year ago, and the ratings looked at the practices of the banks from 2011 to 2013. Of these 2 banks, the one that the town currently has funds in, roughly about $655,000 in Santander Bank. I've spoken to folks at the State Treasurer's Office. I've also spoken with the person from government banking at Santander. And you guys have that Santander's press release on that. Basically, the bank is very committed to community reinvestment. They underscored that this rating period, as I said earlier, goes back to 2011 and 2013. And they are quite confident that the Office of the Control of the Currency, who comes out with the CRA ratings, will rate them favorably going forward. It's kind of an interesting learning process through this. One is, it's not the state treasurer's office that regulates it, it's the state banking commissioner. State banking commissioner, from what I understand, made this announcement to them in December, and they notified us in January. There is no requirement for the banks to notify, this is what they told us at the state treasurer's office, there's no requirement for the banks to notify the towns that there's a CRA issue. And the bank, and they don't notify us directly. So I thought that was a little interesting. The reason I bring this up is again, because, the Board of Finance by charter has control over the various bank accounts. This related to one of our bank accounts. Later on the agenda, you have an item to talk about approving, or reapproving public depositories. And so, this is where you can kind of react to this. My overall sense is that when the new ratings come out, this will actually probably not be an issue anymore. As far as I was told, there is no penalty for this. But again, I don't want to minimize the fact that the rating was bad based on 2/11/2013, and the Community Reinvestment Act, arguably has a good public purpose.
So Jim, let me ask you a question. Where this bank is originated from, which bank? You know what I mean?
Well,
It's like all these banks started as.
Well, Santander is now is a Spanish bank. They're headquartered in Spain.
But which
Bank of
banks were
Boston.
bought out? Bank of Boston?
Bank of Boston.
Okay.
Yeah, then at one time they were
Bank of New England?
they were Sovereign, which is the
Sovereign.
Sovereign.
which was in Wyoming, Pennsylvania.
Right.
Which is outside.
That's the
which is
reason
in
what is
Reading area.
sovereign bank, okay.
Yeah,
I got you.
sovereign.
So.
They don't have sovereign immunity though.
Right, which is didn't they buy the Union Trust? Is that the Union Trust?
No,
that
Union
was Wells
Trust is
Fargo.
Wells Fargo.
Wells Fargo.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
then they were
I've
Wachovia.
lost track of it. Hard to keep track of all these banks. But, so this is October of 17 is their press release that says
Right.
how much they've done. So, and so it's impressive to the point that they're throwing a lot more commitment that wasn't present before.
Yeah, and they also have a lot of, on the back, there's organizations that have kind of
Endorsed their.
endorsed their plan.
Their new
There are some
plan.
in Connecticut, there's some in Waterbury, Hartford. Again, there's some other Waterburys in Hartford scattered through there. And it's not just Connecticut, it's other areas they do business. There's Boston, Dorchester, the Bronx, Providence, in different places.
Jim, they used to have an office over on Main Street, or East Main. Is there an office in Branford now for Santander?
I believe it's not there anymore. They were over by the pet store
Scissors
there.
Park.
Yeah,
Drive.
yeah. Is there, so they don't have an office in Branford anymore?
I don't believe so.
They're really, Victor, from Hartford up to the Mass border. They don't have anything down in the New Haven region.
I mean, historically, we've tried to have some deposits in the banks that were geographically within the town borders.
Yeah, and when we did, they were.
They
in
were,
town when we first-
okay. All right, so this is informational at this point in time. Charlie?
Do I understand now from what you said, there's a state statute that says no public funds can go into these low-rated banks. The state of Connecticut ranks the banks, but doesn't tell the towns or the cities. They tell the banks don't tell the towns or cities. So I don't get the why.
There's a disconnect at the treasurer's
Yeah.
office,
Yeah,
is what it is.
and according to the letter, they said may not receive public deposits. So it's not even clear whether, does that mean new public deposits, or does that mean, so there's basically they would say, ask your counsel. In our case, they're not our primary depository bank. So I know some of my colleagues have thought about going out doing RFPs for this. And, in some of our discussions, I said, well, by the time you do your RFP and solicit responses and evaluate them, you may find that your bank is now no longer, under the needs to improve rating.
Yeah.
So it's, I don't know, it was kind of an eye-opening experience for me. This is the first time I've seen one of these letters, and then, nearly 20 years I've been here, so.
Yeah, and it really isn't a safety and soundness issue.
It is not, no.
So, I mean, I'd be more concerned with that. It's just concerning their CRA activities, which means they're not utilizing the deposits where they're getting their deposits to invest in the communities, and it's going elsewhere. So, again, I think if it was a safety and soundness issue, we would be looking at it differently.
Right.
Now, I know we're going to be talking about the banks on another agenda item, but do we know what their cap ratio or other measurements are relative to others?
I don't know it off the top of my head, but, most of the banks now are much stronger than they were in the past, so when we get their qualified public depository statements, they meet our threshold of having the risk-based capital more than 10%.
Okay, well, based on the fact that we did, as Charlie points out, that there is a state statute with regards to 36A-33 with regards to receiving deposits. They have received deposits. It's not a lot of money, but it's still, maybe it's more of the signal, the fact that maybe we should consider taking the money out of the bank and seeing if they improve. Then they solicit us, but they're not in the town. And unless you think there's a need to keep money in that bank, then
there isn't a overly, pressing need. So,
Okay.
and again, I know they have ATMs in town. I don't know if, they don't have the branch, so
they do have ATMs in town?
I believe so, yeah.
So they are servicing some of our citizens
Yeah.
in some capacity. That's helpful to know. All right, so for now, we can think about this. We're going to be able to vote on the authorized depositories on another agenda item. So if we're so inclined and they do not make the list, then the money gets out anyhow.
One more question.
Yeah.
Do we have limits of deposits in certain banks? How much we can deposit?
No, there isn't. I mean, there's basically where we have set limits is in some of the other investments. So, for example, when we were setting up alternatives to the short-term investment fund back in 2008, and that's another agenda item. That's where we did some stuff with FICA Stonecastle. We also did multi-bank securities, for example, and Alvarez and Marcel when we were buying CDs there as well, because those were relatively new engagements for us. I mean, back when they started. So limits were set then for those type of things, and there's another item on the agenda to revisit those limits. But generally, most of the money that the town has is in the short-term investment fund still, and that's with the state of Connecticut. The state of Connecticut has been the largest depositor in that fund. In my earlier years, the investing was pretty simple because, most people put most of the money in the STIF fund, and then some money was in a product called MBIA class. And one of the advantages they had was that, we had automatic repayment of some of our debts, and we did some of our self-insurance through that. But then back in 07, 08, when the interest rates were very, very low, those non-government pools were really unable to make it because the rates were so low there wasn't enough spread. So those investments actually closed. And so then what we did, we set up more STIF accounts because we wanted to have the ability to have our debt payments drawn right out of it. That's important for Branford is because we have a lot of Clean Water Fund loans, and those are monthly payments. So if you have 3 Clean Water Fund loans, that's 36 payments, a year, in addition to your regular debt payments, which are semi-annual. So we don't have a big staff to keep wiring money every time there's a debt payment. So to get a decent rate of return, to have money automatically pulled out of your account makes a lot of sense. Same thing is with the self-insurance funds as well. The medical self-insurance fund, for example, is paying the claims for both the Board of Ed and the town. And, those type of vehicles are very attractive. So we started out as looking at alternatives to STIF. We created some. MBIA closed. That money went back into STIF. But the money is spread out among a number of institutions, in the town. But the largest deposits is with STIF, and then Bank of America is our main bank. So there's always a healthy balance there because we're on a compensating balance arrangement. So that covers the bulk of our banking fees. But we don't have.
But there is no limit.
We don't have a set limit on every single account, no.
Okay.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Jim. So unless someone is inclined here, again, I think, the board we do have control over the depositories. And, it is a state requirement. This Community Reinvestment Act serves purposeful. What we don't know is what their rating is relative to any of the others, except they're the only two that were below some level of satisfactory.
Correct.
Rating. So you can have a couple of choices. One, we could take no action. Two, we could say take the money out. Three, we could just hold until we understand what the new rating is. So
I
you
would
want to make a
recommend the
motion?
third. I'd recommend the third.
The third is to hold?
Yeah, I think that's a prudent.
So that's your motion?
Yes.
I'll second it.
Motion's been made and seconded. Discussion, Jeff, you had a question?
No, I was just going to say, we can take care of that in the next item.
Okay, we got a motion, we got discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Very good. Next item, which is to review and approve the updated list of the town's qualified depositories. As Jeff mentioned, Santander is on the list, as well as Wells Fargo. And why don't we go down, Jim is going to go over this, but the list is Key Bank, Capital One Bank, Citizens Bank, Webster Bank, Guilford Savings, Liberty Bank, TD Bank, People's United Bank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and Santander. Those are the current approved depositories.
Yeah, and again, it's been some years since we've updated this list. Some of the names change, so, I think it's important, and the chairman and I were talking about this last week to update the list. Doesn't mean that we have money in all of these banks, but, if we wanted to, we could. And again, it's fairly straightforward. I did bold and asterisk Wells Fargo and Santander because of, the CRA issues. And like I said, the largest one that we have by far is Bank of America. And those deposits are we have a separate collateral agreement with Bank of America, so those deposits are fully collateralized.
Okay, so there's a motion here that this would be resolved that the Board of Finance designates the following institutions as approved depositories for the town of Branford, provided they comply with the guidelines outlined in the investment policy. And the banks were the ones that I previously listed. Somebody want to make that motion or have some discussion on it before a motion?
I have one question. Is there a United Bank? Is there?
Yeah.
Where is that located?
It's up in mid-state area.
Mid-state.
I actually have it back in the
Okay.
office. I had their sheet here.
Well, they do have a branch office in Hamden.
Yeah.
I'll move that we approve
And they have a
that
government
list.
banking division. I just want to add one quick thing, is that, these are like deposit accounts. The town has other type of investments, so for example, when we use brokered CDs and stuff, those are other banks, but they're below the FDIC limit, so. These are banks where we put money in over and above the FDIC limit.
Victor has made a motion to move the resolution. It's been seconded by Jeff. Discussion?
I'm good.
Good.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, Jim. Next is to discuss Board of Finance cap on, to adopt a resolution designating signers for the town bank accounts. And again, we have a memo here from Jim that I'll read it. I recently sent a memo to staff regarding fraud, which included a number of items and steps we can take to reduce our risk for fraud. One of these items involving the review of signature cards annually. Recently, I encountered resistance from a bank when I asked to remove a signer. Therefore, I prepared a resolution appointing finance director, assistant finance director, first selectman, and treasurer as account signers. And so the proposed resolution would be resolved that the Board of Finance authorizes James P. Finch Jr., finance director, Catherine H. LaBanca, assistant finance director, James B. Cosgrove, first selectman, and Michael T. Nardella, treasurer, to maintain an act on deposit accounts for the town of Branford.
I'll move that, Joe.
Moved
I'll
by
second it.
Robert, seconded by Jeff. Discussion. Just a question, Jim.
Yep.
You encountered resistance from a bank.
Well, basically, they were looking for a resolution.
Resolution.
So I thought, if I
Okay,
could get a
yeah.
resolution, most cases I won't have a problem, but if I do, I could say, well, on January, what's
Right.
today's date, and then I have certified minutes, and I could have something
Right.
else to show. So it may not work all the time, but it's going to be more than what I have now.
Right. So, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say that years ago, after every election, you'd have to get all new signature cards for every account. And I know you have fewer accounts now.
Well, yeah, and then what happened is, there was a lot of years where it didn't change, and then,
Yeah, okay. All right, that's the resolution. Did somebody move it?
Yeah, I
We
did.
did, I second.
Yeah, I did.
Second, okay, I'm catching up here. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Number 8, to discuss the Board of Finance cap on investments with Stone Castle, FICA, Multi-Bank Securities, and Avalars and Marshall. And again, these are alternative investments that that we have approved previously. Jim, you want to cover this?
Yeah, and this was where I drifted in my long-winded answer to Charlie's question when you talked about limits. And yeah, there are limits on certain institutions, and these institutions came about as stiff alternatives. And Charlie, you probably remember when you had met with Kenny and myself, and we kind of went through with some of these institutions, and we set limits, as the town's deposits grow. And since we sort of had a theme for banking issues for the night, the thought was to increase these slightly so that, we could further, diversify against our other investments, primarily like the STIF fund.
Thanks, Jim. So, again, as Jim's memo pointed out, there's a multi-bank had a old limit of $2 million. He's suggesting $3.5 million. Valera's and Marcel from $3 million to $4.5, and from Stone Castle, FICA, from $5 to $6.5 million. And so, if we do we have other questions from Jim before I read some motions?
Yeah, Jim,
Bob,
I'm
go
sorry. Jim, so currently, do we have investments with any of these groups?
We do.
Okay. And can you give me a number on each one?
Yeah, I can. So Alvarez and Marcel, and again, this is because of the interest that accrued. It's $3,042,097. Stone Castle FICA is $4,558,280, and multi-bank is $2,477,000. That account goes back to '08, and that's really accumulated interest. It's stated in the account.
What's the average return on these, Jim?
Well, they vary. I mean, the overall portfolio right now, because interest rates have risen, there's basically about about $74 million in various investments, and now the rate is north of 1, so it's in that 1.1 to 1.2 range.
Jim, do we continue to do due diligence on these?
Well,
Do you do a yearly or?
These three institutions, sort of the product takes care of itself, and let me explain that. Multi-bank securities, we're only buying CDs that are within the FDIC limits. Same with Alvarez and Marcel.
Okay.
Now, what happens is, usually I'll buy stuff, for a year or two, and I'll ladder them. The reason I don't go too short term is because then if they show me a new CD, I got to update my exclusions to make sure that we don't have a concentration risk with the insurance limits. And then so Alvarez and Marcel and multi-bank, basically, you're buying FDIC packages. The Stone Castle FICA is a little bit different. It invests in a number of banks, and I also did send them the treasurer's letter to these institutions as well, FICA that is, and that's actually a liquid investment. Currently, that rate I believe is 1.25. And what's interesting is when I had looked about a year or so ago when we were considering this, the short-term investment fund at the state of Connecticut also uses this. So it's basically it's liquid funds, but they invest in a number of different banks. So it's an FDIC insured product. So all of these things here, can trace their insurance back to the FDIC.
Great, thanks, Jim.
Okay, other questions? So I'll read the three resolutions, and then we'll vote on them all at the same time if you so choose. Resolved that the Board of Finance authorizes the Finance Director and Town Treasurer to increase the investment limit with multi-bank securities from $2 million to $3.5 million. Second would be resolved, the Board of Finance authorizes the Finance Director and Town Treasurer to increase the investment limit with Alvarez and Marcel from $3 million to $4.5 million. And resolved that the Board of Finance authorizes the Finance Director and the Town Treasurer to increase investment limit with Stonecastle FICA from $5 million to $6.5 million.
I'll move those.
I'll second.
resolutions.
Been moved by Victor, seconded by Robert. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. That covers our agenda for tonight. Anything else, Jamie, we need to talk about, or you good to go? All right, with no
Motion adjourned.
motion made by Victor. Seconded by Jeff. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
The preceding program was brought to you through the support of the Town of Branford. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at BranfordTV.org.